Good day everyone. Today I'm going to tackle about the story of Odysseus, about all his adventures before he arrived in his homeland Ithaca. So this story happened after the Trojan War, which Odysseus took part into. Cassandra, one of King Priam's daughters, was a prophetess. He was loved by the god Apollo and was bestowed the power to foretell the future. But when she refused him, she got cursed. No one ever believed her words. She told the Trojan War what would happen and that the Greeks were hidden inside a wooden horse, but no one considered her thoughts. It was her fate to know that disaster was coming and be unable to avert it. When the Greeks sacked the city, she was in Athena's temple, clinging to her image under the goddess' protection. The Greeks found her, and they dared to lay violent hands on her. The lesser chieftain Ajax tore and dragged Cassandra from the altar of Athena's temple. No one protested against the sacrilege. Athena's wrath was ignited and became deep. She wanted to make the Greeks terribly punished. So she talked to Poseidon to destroy all the Greek ships by the wild whirlwinds. Poseidon agreed. Since the Troy was a heap of ashes by now, he then decided to take revenge against the Trojans. In the fearful tempest which struck the Greeks after they left for Greece, Agamemnon came near to losing all his ships. Menelaus was blown to Egypt, and the arch-sinner, sacrilegious Ajax, got drowned for telling he was one the sea could not drown. He would have been saved if he didn't wear such arrogance. That's why the gods were angry and Poseidon broke off the jug, a bit of rock which he was clinging. Ajax fell and the waves swept him away to his death. While Odysseus, he didn't lose his life, but suffered than the other Greeks. He wandered for 10 years before he saw his home. Meanwhile, in Ithaca, the island where his home was, things had gone from bad to worse. Everyone believed that Odysseus was already dead except for his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. People assumed that the queen should marry again. That's why men came to woo Penelope, but she would have none of them, determined to wait for Odysseus. The men were rude, greedy, and overbearing, who spent their days sitting in the great wall of the house, devouring Odysseus' store of provisions, slaughtering his cattle, his sheep, his wine, burning his wood, and giving orders to his servants. Since the men would never leave until Penelope consented to marry one of them, she came up to a plan. She said she couldn't marry until she had woven a very fine and exquisitely wrought shroud for Odysseus' father. The men agreed and waited. Penelope's condition was just a trick. She unwove each night what she had woven during the day, but sadly the trick failed when one of her handmaidens told the suitors and discovered her in the very act. After it, the men became more insistent and unmanageable. This was the time when the 10th year of Odysseus' wanderings neared its close. Athena actually favored Odysseus. She was delighted in his wily mind, his shrewdness, and his cunning. But because of the weak way the Greeks had treated Cassandra, and after the fall of Troy, she included him with others in her wrathful displeasure. After 10 years, the gods had grown sorry for Odysseus except Poseidon. The sorriest was Athena. Athena wanted to help Odysseus, so when Poseidon was absent in the meeting of the gods, she brought the sad case of Odysseus. Athena told them the current situation of Odysseus, and at the moment, Odysseus was a prisoner on an island ruled by the nymph called Calypso, who loved him and planned to never let him go. Calypso offered him anything with kindness except for his freedom, but Odysseus was utterly rich. He longed for his home, his wife, and his son. The Olympians were moved by her words. Zeus spoke in and said they must put their heads together and contrive a way for Odysseus to return home. Zeus sent Hermes to Calypso to tell her that she must let Odysseus go and help him start on his voyage back to his home. Athena, well pleased by the gods' decisions, left Olympus and glided down to Ithaca. Athena disguised herself to look like a seafaring man and went to Telemachus. She was exceedingly fond of Telemachus not only because he was her dear Odysseus' son, but because he was a sober, discreet young man, steady and prudent and dependable. She thought it would do him good to take a journey while Odysseus was sailing home. When they shared food and wine, Telemachus shared his worry to the guests about his father. Athena advised him to try find out something about his father's fate. She said Nestor and Menelaus could say where his father is. Telemachus followed Athena's advice. So he asked ships and rowers from their kingdom, but he got no answer except jeers and taunts. In despair, Telemachus silently prayed to Athena. Athena heard him and came in appearance of a mentor whom of all the Ithacan Odysseus had most trusted. She then gave him a fast ship and sailed with him. When Telemachus came into Pylos, Nestor's kingdom, he asked him about his father, but Nestor didn't know something about Odysseus. Instead, he advised the young man to ride on a chariot with one of his sons and go to Menelaus. Telemachus arrived at Sparta and was given a princely welcome together with Nestor's son. Menelaus courteously accommodated the princess. Menelaus began talking about Odysseus, which made Telemachus' thirst drop fall. Menelaus shared his experience in Egypt, where he got stuck in an island called Pharos. But a sea goddess helped him how to get out in the island and gave him the information from Proteus. He got informed that Odysseus was at that time under the territory of the nymph Calypso. Meantime, in Calypso's lovely island, which had become Odysseus' hateful prison, Hermes was sent by Zeus came to convince the nymph to free Odysseus. Calypso took Zeus' orders in a very ill part. She had saved the man's life, she said, when his ship was wrecked near the island, and cured him ever since. She didn't want to let Odysseus go after the benefits she had given, but she has no choice, because it was Zeus' command. She helped Odysseus build a strong raft and gave him enormous supplies. After that, Odysseus journeyed safely in 17 days, but in the 18th day, Poseidon saw him on his way back to Ethiopia. He knew at once what the gods had done, but he said to himself, I think I can give him even yet a long journey into sorrow before he reaches land. Poseidon brought all the violent winds binding the sea with storm clouds. Odysseus saw death before him. It seemed indeed that he could not escape, but a kindly goddess was at hand and saved him. Ino of the slim ankles who had once been a Theban princess. She pitied him and rising lightly from the water like a seagull, she told him his one chance was to abandon the raft and swim to shore. She gave him her veil, which would keep him from harm as long as he was in the sea. Then she disappeared beneath the billows. Odysseus had no choice but to follow his advice. After Poseidon sent a waves to him, a terror of the sea, he felt satisfied and went off contentedly to plan some other storm somewhere, and Athena left free to act to calm the waves. Odysseus had to swim for 2 days and nights before he reached land and could find a safe landing place. He came out of the surf exhausted and starving and naked. He reached the country belonging to Phaeacians with a good king named Alcinous. The queen was Crete and their daughter was Nausicaa. The next morning, the Princess Nausicaa, who was in charge of the household line and washing clothes, was then a very agreeable occupation. The princess went to the river where Odysseus had landed to wash clothes with the servants. Odysseus was awakened by the girls' voices, and the girls ran away in terror except for Nausicaa. She faced him fearlessly and he spoke to her as persuasively as his tongue could. She then answered him kindly. She told him where he was and that the people of the country were kind to luckless wanderers. Nausicaa advised him to talk to the queen for help because what the queen says is what the king does. Odysseus arrived at Nausicaa's home and bowed down to pay respect when he saw the queen and king. The king quickly raised him and bade him sit at the table and take his fill of food and drink without fear. Whoever he was, wherever his home, he could rest assured that they would arrange to send him there in one of their ships. The next day, in the presence of all the Phaeacian chiefs, he told the story of his 10 years' wandering. He began with a departure from Troy and storm that struck the fleet. He and his ships were driven across the sea for 9 days. On the 10th day, they made the land of lotus eaters and put in there. The inhabitants met them with kindness and gave them their flour food to eat. But the food was a trap. Everybody who tasted it will lose their longing for home and memories in their minds, wanting only to dwell in Lotus land. Odysseus had to drag by force his men on the shipboard and chain them there. Their next adventure was with the Cyclops Polyphemus. They lost a number of their comrades at his hands, and what was even worse, it made Poseidon, who was Polyphemus' father, so angry that he swore Odysseus should reach his own country again after his long misery, and when he had lost all his men. For these 10 years his anger had followed him over the sea. From the Cyclops island, they came to the country of the winds, ruled over by King Aeolus. Aeolus received them hospitably, and when they left, he gave Odysseus as a parting gift a leather sack, into which he had put all the storm winds. It was tightly fastened that not the very least puff of any wind that spells danger for a ship could leak out. But one Odysseus' crew got curious and opened the sack, for they thought that it was stored bag full of gold. They opened it, and the winds rushed out at once and swept them away in a terrific tempest. After days of danger, they saw land, but they had better have stayed in the stormy sea, for it was the country of Laestrygons, a people of gigantic size and cannibals too. These horrible folk destroyed all Odysseus' ships except the one he himself was in. After that despairing worst disaster, they moved to the next island, Aiaia, the realm of Circe, a most beautiful and dangerous witch. She turned every man who approached her into a beast, and that includes Odysseus' men. However, Odysseus with Hermes' help didn't get transformed because Hermes told him a herb which could save him from Circe's deadly art. Circe thereby was amazed when he saw he didn't get affected by his magic. She so marveled at the man who could resist her enchantment that she fell in love with him. Circe listened and followed Odysseus' commands. She turned his companions at once back into men again. She treated them all with such kindness. They lived in Aiaia happily for a year. Before they left, Circe used her magical knowledge for them. She found out what they must do in order to get home safely. Following Circe's tip, Odysseus and his crew came Erebus, where Hades ruled with Persephone. They had filled the trench with sheep's blood in order to find the spirit of Tiresias to tell them how to get home. Tiresias said the chief danger was might do injury to the oxen of the sun. Odysseus kept following Circe's tip to sail home. He knew that they would pass the island of Sirens. Sirens were marvelous singers whose voices would make a man forget all else, and last their song would steal his life away. In order to not hear the sirens singing, every man needed to stop their ears with wax. However, Odysseus would like to hear the voices. He asked his crew to tie him on the mast when they passed by Sirens, and Odysseus became the only one who heard Sirens' songs and voices. When they arrived safely, a sea peril next awaited them, the passage between Scylla and Charybdis. The Argonauts had got through it. Aeneas, who just about the time had sailed for Italy, had been able to avoid it because of a prophet's warning, while on the other hand, Odysseus with Athena looking after him succeeded in passing it, but it was a frightful ordeal and 6 of the crew lost their lives. For their next stop, they arrived at the island of the sun. The men were hungry and they killed the sacred oxen. Odysseus that time was away and he was in despair when he saw what his crew has done. The sun immediately took his revenge. A thunderbolt shattered the ship when they left. Everyone drowned except for Odysseus. He clung to the keel and was able to ride out the storm. Then he drifted for days until finally he was cast ashore on Calypso's island, where he had to stay for many years, 7 years exactly. In the end, after all the danger he encountered, he succeeded in reaching the Phaeacian land, a helpless, destitute man. The long story was ended, but the audience was silent, entranced by the tale Odysseus just shared. At last the king spoke and assured Odysseus to help him sit into his home. Every man who was present sent a parting gift to him. Finally, Odysseus made it back to his own country, Ithaca. He met Athena in there at the shore, who disguised as a young man, but eventually tell him his real identity. Athena told him how things were in his house and promised she would help him clear it of the suitors. Athena then disguised him as a beggar, so he can go anywhere unrecognized and can remain hidden while he analyzed the loyalty of his friends and family. That night, he must spend with his swineherd, Eumaeus, a man faithful and trustworthy beyond praise. Eumaeus welcomed the poor stranger, fed him well, and lodged him for the night. Meanwhile, at Pallas Athena's prompting, Telemachus took leave of Helen and Menelaus' home. Athena told him to go directly to the house on landing, but first to the swineherd to learn if anything had happened in his absence. Telemachus arrived in swineherd and met there Eumaeus and his father Odysseus, which he didn't recognize because Odysseus was still disguised as a beggar. Eumaeus left them to tell Penelope his return. Athena turned Odysseus back to his old form and bade him to tell Telemachus who he was. He confronted his son Telemachus and revealed his identity to him. The two reunited again and planned together on how to drive the suitors out their home. Odysseus disguised as an old beggar among Penelope's suitors. When he arrived in their house, Penelope didn't recognize him. However, Odysseus' nurse Euryclea did when she saw the scar on his foot as she washed his feet, the scar he got in his babyhood days when he hunted by a wild boar. The next morning, Penelope laid down a challenge to the suitors. While holding the bow and arrow of Odysseus, Penelope said she will marry anyone who can shoot an arrow straight through 12 rings, exactly what Odysseus can do to it. The men tried, but none of them could do it. Until the beggar got a chance. He was ridiculed as he tried, but Odysseus shot the arrow perfectly. Athena then changed his appearance to his previous one. The suitors were awestruck. It was then that Odysseus and Telemachus began their attack. With the help of Athena and Zeus, they slaughtered all the suitors. After the slaughter, Euryclea woke Penelope in her slumber to tell her that Odysseus has come and all the suitors are dead. The well-ordered hall was filled with rejoicing. The people celebrated his comeback. For Odysseus at last, after long wandering, had come home, and every heart was glad. Odysseus finally took his place as a king once again, alongside with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. And that's the end of the story of Odysseus before he arrived in his homeland. So in this story, it emphasized the emotions of Odysseus, which is longing to go home in his family and his homeland. Odysseus' love for his family is exceptional, that he endured all the dangerous adventures he encountered, while Penelope and Telemachus stayed to trust and believe that Odysseus was alive. They never got swayed by the people's opinions about Odysseus being dead. And that's for today. Thank you for listening.